So I'm Brecht. I'm a front-end freelance engineer. I'm a co-founder and trainer at StrongBrew. I'm also a trainer at ThoughtRam. We have a blog. I don't know if you already heard of it. We mostly blog about RxJS and Angular architecture, that kind of stuff. So if you're willing, totally check it out. So only one slide about StrongBrew. So what we do trainings, we do coaching, we kickstart new projects, we do consultancy, code reviews, and all that we do is based on best practices, or at least what we think that best practices are. So enough about StrongBrew. Today we're here about architecture. Right? So what is architecture? If I have to sum up a description about architecture, it would be a good architecture is simply an opinionated system of knowing where to put something. Everybody has opinions about architecture. If a team knows where he can put something inside of the code base, for me, by definition, it's a good architecture because teams are productive in it. So a few important aspects about architecture. We have to be future-proof, right? Because most of us probably work in agile environments, and in a few months, our PM will tell us something different, and we have to refactor a lot of stuff. So we will have to handle legacy as well. We have to do refactoring. We want to have a consistent structure. And these are all aspects about architecture. But the most important one, at least the one that we're going to tackle today, is share and reuse. So let's take this scenario. We have a web shop app and we have a stock management app. They both have two modules that they want to share. They have a stock module and an authentication module. And let's just say that the web shop app and the stock management app are kind of empty shells, and they share the stock module almost completely and the authentication module as well. So how are we going to share that? The first thing that might have popped in our mind is NPM. We can publish it on NPM and we can start sharing it through everybody that wants to use these pieces of code. The downside a bit is that we have to maintain all these different NPM packages. And right now, we're talking about two modules, but when you're working in quite a large organization, you might end up having 20 or 100 or even more NPM packages. And they all have their own repos. They have to manage those as well. So it's quite expensive in maintenance. There's some awkward development because you have to publish when you, well, not really have to publish, but you have to build every time you want to use something in another application. And you can have version mismatches. So let's say that you have 20 NPM packages, and 10 of them are using Angular 6, and 2 are using 7, and maybe in a few weeks, 8. It's hard because you can get conflicts. So you want everything to be on the same Angular version. And if you want to update one package, then you have to update the other one and the other one. It's hard. So what we can do to fix this issue is we can go through a monorepo where you have, in theory, 0 NPM packages and you only have one repository. Let's call it StrongBrew because StrongBrew is the organization in this hypothetical matter. So we have a web shop app, a stock management app. These two are being shared. But since we are using a mono repository, it's quite easy because it's easy to share. It's in the same repo. We can just import it if we want to. Only our tsconfig should be importing it. And it forces us to have everything on the same version. I would even be so bold to say that if you're using a monorepo in Angular, it's a good idea to only have one package.json file. One package.json file that has all the Angular version of the same level. There are other ways of doing it, but the easiest way is to only maintain one package.json file. So we don't need to publish anymore to NPM. So there are 3 kind of monorepos, and this is just personal terminology. We have the organization-wide monorepo, and the organization-wide monorepo is just a repository that contains all the Angular-related code of an entire organization, right? That makes it super easy to share because it's all there. It's not always possible, though. If your company is selling products to different clients, your client's probably not going to want everything to be on the exact repository. I don't even think you can achieve that legally. But in this scenario, we don't have to publish anything to NPM. A scoped monorepo or a platform monorepo is basically a monorepo that contains projects that have something in common. Think about a platform. Think about, for instance, Facebook. Facebook has Facebook, it has Messenger, it has Pages. Chances are big that they are sharing code, but that doesn't mean the entire organization should be inside of that monorepo. You can say, like, this is my platform, or these are even two projects that share code. You can put it in a scoped monorepo. And if you have a scoped monorepo, then you have an issue. And that issue is you will still have code that needs to be shared, right? You will have multiple scope monorepos. And that's when you can use a toolkit. This is something that I believe that every company needs, unless you have an organizational-wide monorepo, because then everything is already there. So a toolkit, it does not contain business logic. That's really important. It will contain custom RxJS operators. It will contain HTTP extensions. It will contain form extensions, and so on. So basically everything that you have to write all over again every time you create a new application. And it's important to note here that everything will be published to NPM. So we will have multiple packages inside of our toolkit, and they all will be published to NPM. Okay? So how do we share code inside of a monorepo? We can just do this. We can just say stock service, and we import it from wherever stock service lives. We're not going to do that, because that's a dirty import. .. lives in stock source lib. We don't care about that. What we actually want is this. We want to import it from a clean namespace, strongblue/stock. But we're not using NPM, so how are we going to do that? You can use Typescript path mapping, which is a feature that is baked into Typescript. So the only thing that you need to do is you need to create a barrel file. And that barrel file is just an index.ts file, which exports everything that you need. You will have one barrel file for every project. We'll cover that later on. There will, of course, not be one line in there. It will be multiple lines. But only the things that you need to be exported will be in there. And then in the tsconfig JSON configuration file, we just need to map it. So we have a path property inside of the compiler options. And we're saying, at strongblue/stock, you need to map it to that specific barrel file. And you do not need any framework for that. This is just Typescript. We will see that the framework's implemented in the same way, because Typescript path mapping is really cool. Because let's say later on, at strongblue/stock, we're going to throw that in an NPM package as well. The only thing that we need to do is we have to remove that line, and all our code will keep on working because the namespace is clean. So what happens when we're importing from within a project lib? So in this scenario, we have a stock service, and the stock service will fetch stock from some kind of microservice maybe, and it needs the stock type. Okay? We can see it needs stock. Well, there, of course. But this also poses a problem because we're in the project. It doesn't need to know that it has to be exposed in strongbrew/stock, because right now we have a stock service. It will import from strongbrew/stock, which will resolve to the index.ts file, which will export the stock service. So we have a circular dependency. So this is basically what we want. And this is for every type of monorepo. When you're doing Angular or React or whatever, it doesn't really matter. You do not want to have those circular dependencies. A few other best practices before we go to the next part is avoid these dependencies, of course. And you can only have one barrel file per library. Of course, it might seem cool if you have a services folder that contains like 20 services that you also put an index.ts file in there, and then you import the other barrel file. Don't do that. Just keep one barrel file, otherwise you will have these circular dependencies over and over again. So we already saw that we can use monorepos to share code. We saw the 3 different types of monorepos. We saw how we can import from these monorepos. So how are we going to manage organization-wide or scoped monorepos? NX is built by the amazing people of Narwhal, who focuses on consultancy for very big applications, very big companies. So they have created a custom schematic, a thin layer on top of the Angular CLI that is used to manage monorepos. It has some scaffolding, and it also uses the Typescript path mapping. So when we're talking NX monorepos, we're talking about a workspace. And a workspace is a list of applications, of apps, and a list of libs. An app is an empty shell. It does not contain any business logic. It will use all these libs, it will leverage them in orchestrating an application. So the apps, it will have routing and stuff like that. Maybe it will have a top bar, but there will be no business logic in that. It will all be orchestrated to our libs, because those libs can be used across the entire monorepo. So if you want to create a workspace, we can just use Narwhal schematics. And Narwhal schematics is the npm package name that stands for NX. And we use the command create NX workspace strongbrew, because strongbrew is the name of our workspace. It will also be the name of our npm scope, the add strongbrew that we saw in our imports. We navigate directly into it, and we can create an application in there by using the ng generate app. It's a command from the CLI, and we were going to call that app webshop. Like we said before, we have 2 different apps, so we can also create an app stock management. We have covered apps, but in a workspace there are also libs. So let's create a lib in there. Let's call it just a lib. So ng generate lib name just a lib. The reason why I'm using npx, by the way, is because I want to use a specific version of NX. So when I'm standing here, that things don't go wrong. So what is being generated by these commands? We have strongbrew, which is the workspace. We have apps, which is a list of all the apps we have created. And every app that we create also gets an end-to-end app being generated for us, whether we like it or not. And then we have a libs folder, which has 3 libs. Right now, just a lib 2, and just a lib 3. It will become bigger and bigger and bigger. So if you don't do anything specific, you will maintain a flat list of a lot of libs. 3 other files worth mentioning is the Angular JSON file, which is basically the heart of any Angular application, which contains the entire configuration of Angular. The only thing specific in NX there is that it will resolve to the schematics from Narwhal instead of the regular schematics from Angular. So this is really important. NX is just a really, really thin layer on top of the CLI. It's just a custom schematic. The NX.json file is being used to add tags to specific projects. In the next chapter, we're going to see how we can leverage tags and making sure that we cannot import from wherever we want to. And then the last, tsconfig.json, because of the TypeScript path mappings, which are also automatically being generated for us by NX. But the problem is the flat list of libs, it will become huge, and you do not want to be searching through an entire organizational monorepo and finding all the different projects there. So how do we structure that? Dan Abramov A software engineer at Facebook tweeted a while ago, move files around until it feels right. And when you have a flat list, that's kind of what you need to do. This is also what I did. I was moving files around like weeks at a time. It was really fun. And then we came up with this specific solution. We're not saying that it's the best solution. It's something that works for us. There are different solutions. Like Narwhal has recently published a book on how they structure their applications. Totally check that out. So the libs directory. This is already being generated for us, right? So let's dive in at the first level, feature. The feature contains all the feature logic, so all the domain logic, everything that is something to do with business should be inside of the feature. Then we have UIKit and we have utils. These are both directly libs. So feature is a directory with 3 other directories below it, and we will see later on what lives in there. But UIKit and utils are actual libs. And UIKit, they will contain date pickers, custom form controls, probably, maybe some directives, and the utils will contain RxJS operators, extensions to help you with translations, stuff that are just utils that you use as a tool belt. So inside of the feature directory, you have the first level, which is API. An API contains only services that will do HTTP calls or maybe Firebase communication or other real-time stuff, but only API-wise. And it will contain the DTOs as well. It will not contain any NGRX logic or whatever, only simple TypeScript files that will go to the backend and return a specific type. Because this is the thing that is being shared most when you're creating monorepos. Because you have a very large application and you need to use the user service in different places. At least for me, that's something that happens a lot. And also, API does not have anything to do with presentation logic. The lazy loading and the shared do. So lazy contains all the lazy loaded modules, which you can also import with the correct npm scope. And the benefit of lazy loading modules is not just that your initial bundle size is smaller. The biggest benefit for me is that your entire lib, your lazy loaded lib, is sandboxed. You will never import stuff from a lazy loaded module, right? Because then it's not lazy loaded anymore. So these are really sandboxes, and it forces the developer to think in an encapsulated manner as well. And then we have the shared, contains shared Angular modules. It's mostly presentation logic, but authentication, for instance, could also be part of that. So these are the 6 libs that are being created for us. So we have add Strongbrew feature API stock, Strongbrew feature API authentication, which are the 2 API libraries. We have 2 more lazy loaded modules, and we have the UIKit and the utils. You can have multiple UIKits as well. Let's say that you have one for mobile, or you have one for desktop or tablet or whatever. It's possible. This is just to give you an idea on how you can structure it. So how do we scaffold that? We already saw the first command, so ng generate lib. And now we call it feature / API / stock. And because of the slashes, it will automatically put it in the right directories, and it will automatically wire the whole thing for us. Then for the lazy loaded part, we append -- lazy -- routing. So we know that NX should make it lazy loadable out of the box. And the -- prefix is also something that is pretty important. This will add a prefix to the tslint config file when you generate a component. So in the first one, it would be stck - and then the rest of your selector. Why is that? Because a selector has to be unique in an Angular application. You cannot have 2 of the same selectors. It will break. So it's a good practice to append a specific prefix. Maybe something better than stck, but you know what I mean. So these are completely generated for us. And when we want to do lazy loading, it's as simple as this. It's basically the same as before, but before we were using relative paths, and now we can use @strongbrew feature lazy authentication, and then the name of the module. Again, when we publish this lazy loaded module to npm, this should keep on working. So right now we have an opinionated structure, but we can still import from wherever the hell we like. That's why NX gives us this TS-lint rule called NX enforce module boundaries. And basically, the whole concept is that we can add tags to all our different projects. If it's an app or it's a lib, we can add tags to it. And then with this specific rule, we can say source tag foo can only depend on libs with tags, and then we can pass an array. Of course, foo bar is not the best solution. You could apply it to teams. Team A can only depend on libs of team B and C, for instance. But we added our own tags for that. So an app is the tag app. The tag in the feature API is called feature API. Then we have feature lazy, feature shared, and shared. So these are the 5 tags that we use quite often. Let me go over it real quickly. An app should only depend on shared, or feature API. It should never depend on another app, for instance, and it should never depend on a lazy loaded module. Of course, it will depend on a lazy loaded module, but through a string, through the load children property that I've just shown before. It should never import from it, because then you're taking parts of lazy loaded lib and you're lazy loading it afterwards. So that's not what we want. Shared can only depend on shared. Makes sense. It cannot depend on an app. It cannot depend on feature API. And it cannot depend on feature lazy or feature shared, because shared is the util kit or the UI kit. These should not start doing AJAX calls. It doesn't make sense. Feature lazy can only depend on shared, feature shared, and feature API. Feature shared can only depend on feature shared, feature API. And the last one, the feature API can only depend on feature API, but it can also depend on the util, for instance. Let's say that for every HTTP call, you have a custom RxJS operator that you want to use to do some error handling, for instance. Then it could consume a shared lib. So I just added this configuration so you can copy paste it for the people who wants to use it. I'm not going to go over it again because it will be kind of boring. So is this set of rules fixed? No. I was dragging and dropping and it was fun and I started adding tags. But for me, it kind of works. I've created quite a few NX workspaces that use this specific approach. And for me, it works. And if it works for you or your team, maybe it's a good fit. If something else works for you and your team, awesome. But the thing is, think about it. Start adding tags to those specific libs, because you do not want to be importing everything from wherever you want, because then you get anarchy. Then, almost finished. Managing toolkits. So we remember a toolkit, we publish everything to npm, right? It does not contain any business logic and so on. And in here we have 3 packages with shared code. We have strongbrew/forms, strongbrew/authentication, and strongbrew/rxjs operators. So, do we need NX for that? We don't. We don't need NX at all. We need Angular, because NX provides us with libs and apps. Angular provides us with libraries and applications, and it's already there in the CLI. They also use TypeScript path mapping, and they have ng packager support out of the box. So everything is there. The only thing that we need to do to build it is called ng build, and it will generate a package for us that we can just dump right onto npm. So the command ng new is probably known. It's a command to generate a new Angular solution. Let's not call it a workspace, let's call it a solution. Let's call it strong brew again, and we append the -dash create application false, because otherwise we will wind up with an app module and an app component and all that stuff, and we do not want that here. So let's navigate into the strong brew directory, and we're gonna generate an application called example. Why will we create an application example? Because if you're gonna start developing those types of packages, you want some kind of UI to see what's happening. Otherwise, maybe you can do it test-driven or whatever, but for me that doesn't really work that pragmatic. So I'm creating an example application with 3 routes, for instance, forms, authentication, and RxJS operators, and you start developing in that. And the cool thing is, when somebody uses your toolkit, they know exactly how they can use it because they have examples there. If you want to go to production with this specific set of libraries that we have generated, this is the only thing that you need to do. You just call ng build, and it will generate a complete package for you that is compliant with all the different hoops that you normally had to jump through. And then we can publish it to npm, and that is that. But what about the developer experience? Because that is a little bit annoying, right? Because every time you update something, you need to publish it, because the tsconfig file that Angular has generated for us, they refer to the dist files. So you have to run npx ng build strong brew forms, for instance, first. This is not what we want, right? Because this is really awkward to develop. So how can we fix this? How can we make sure that we still have the same developer experience as NX gives us, like we're just coding and everything is automatically refreshed? We can just create a tsconfig.dev.json. And it extends from the tsconfig.json, but the paths are being overwritten. They refer to the barrel file. And when you're using Angular instead of NX, barrel files, there are public API.ts. They're also barrel files, but in NX you have to search for index.ts. Okay, so we have created tsconfig.dev.json, and if our application would use that, that would be awesome, but right now we have just created a file. So what we need to do is update the tsconfig app.json from our showcase application, from an example application, and just extend from that. When we run ng-serve example, for instance, we can just start developing, use the TypeScript path mapping, everything works. It's really pragmatic, and when you build, then it will generate everything for us. So the really last part. So how do we make our toolkit complete? Commitison. When you're creating a toolkit, this probably means that an organization is using your toolkit, or maybe if you open source it, multiple organizations will be using it. So you want some kind of clear commit stream. So we have the CLI, the commitison CLI, which will just, you type, just git commit, and then commitison will take over. And it will take you through a, let me just do this once. It will take you through this specific wizard. And it will ask you, are you committing a feature or a fix or docs or whatever? And you will have multiple steps. And when you have done all these steps, you will know which kind of libraries you have affected. And I just lost what I was going to say. and also if there are breaking changes. And this is really important, but because of that, we can calculate new versions. So let me go back. It uses conventional changelog. This is an example of a commit message that is being generated if you go through that specific wizard. So it's a feature. The scope is autocomplete, and I just added a custom operator with autocomplete logic, and it affects @strongbrew/rxjs operators. This is really awesome because right now we can use Lerna, and because of the fact that we have conventional commits, we can have automatic version calculations, semantic versioning. We can have changelog MD generation. The versions in every package.json file are automatically updated for us, and it will create tags just by running this command, because we have committed in a very specific way. Then to take it a little bit further, we can use Husky. And Husky is just a tool to do pre-commit hooks and pre-push hooks. So you can run your linting, you can run your test before you commit, and you can also run commit lint. And commit lint will check the commit messages if they are compliant to what I've just described, to the conventional changelog. And if somebody in your team just decides to put some rubbish in there, then he won't be able to commit. The last thing is Typedoc. Just wanted to put it in there for the sake of completeness. It generates documentation for you, and it's pretty cool because you can type Markdown in your comments as well. So if you have a service or maybe custom RxJS operator and you want to add a code snippet in your comments, it will get generated quite nicely with Typedoc as well. That was it.